Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Krisiun, Mortem Solis, out July 29th on Century Media Records. The album has 10 tracks, 40 minutes in length, and this the band's 12th full-length studio album. They are a Brazilian death metal band. Now this is an old school record, through and through. Old school in the sound, in the experience, and how it moves, and also in the design. A record that has a side A, a side B with an interlude track right in the middle that really divides those two sides that are equal and yet different. And what I mean by that is that on the equal side of it is the brutality of the sound, and how they executed these tracks stays very close to home regardless of where you are within the listening experience. But the album also offers a sense of progression and a sense of evolution. The guitars really change patterns, really change what they're adding to the sound and what they're adding to the construction of the songs the deeper you get into the record. So the journey that you take on side A is slightly different than the journey that you take on side B. Both are brutal, but yet different. Very interesting take, very interesting approach in order to allow this album to have more of an independent DNA from song to song and not become one of those records that is really hard to tell the forest from the trees, which happens quite a bit when you go with this old school death metal sound. As far as the overall sound experience is concerned, I like that production, I like that old school sound, I like that old school approach, but there are some key elements that have to come along with it in order for you to get it. Some are positive, some are negative. As far as the positive side is concerned, I like the brutality that the album holds. It feels very organic. This is an album that doesn't feel overly produced, doesn't feel overly worked, and if you're looking for old school death metal, this is the feel, this is the sound that you want to put forward. It feels brutal, it feels in your face, unapologetic. It's not taking any prisoners, and it's not holding back. The sense of progression sound-wise that you're going to see on the guitars is also definitely a positive throughout the entire listening experience. I just felt like the guitars got more technical as the album progressed, and that allows the sound to change ever so slightly, but not really affect the brutality that you want to give each and every single track. So the guitars have a very important role throughout the entire album. I feel like this is a very guitar-orientated or guitar-driven record through and through. Your connection with the album is going to depend on how much you're going to connect with the guitars. I like the brutal side of the guitars, the heavier, thicker side of the guitars, but also the more piercing, the more direct sound that they offer, including some technical elements in there, elevates the quality, elevates the soundscape that the album has. On the negative side, I felt like the drums were a little bit deep in the mix, or at least they were deep in a semi-consistent way. I wanted them to flourish a little bit more. There are some tracks like As Angels Burn where the drums and guitars are neck and neck from beginning to end, but that is not the pattern throughout the entire album. More often than not, the drums are a little bit deeper, or at least behind the guitars, and they're the ones propelling the guitars forward. So you always feel like the guitar sound comes at you first, and then the drums hit you second. That's not to say that the drums don't have heaviness, don't have strength, that they're not brutal. They have all of those elements. But in terms of the sound mixing, they don't have the ability to feel as equal to the guitars as they should, in my opinion. I think it would add more brutality, perhaps would take a little bit away from that old school flavor, but definitely would make the record even more relentless throughout. Vocally, very consistent. A consistent record. What you get in the first song is what you're going to get all the way through. There's no variations, there's no changes. Is a little bit of the red line of this album, because the drums do pop in the forefront in songs like As Angels Burn, and then they do drop into the background as songs like Necronomical. So you have that movement as far as the drum sound is concerned. And then you have a sense of progression, you have a sense of growth as far as the guitars goes. So there's a lot of movement here. You need something that grounds the record or offers at least a connection between songs so that it's easier for the listener to navigate through side A and side B. I really feel like the vocals are that connection, that red line that grounds the entire album, and it gives the same roots to every single song, regardless of what the starting and finish line are going to be. Overall, this is a death metal album as a death metal album should be. It's not more, it's not less, it's not overworked. It's really, like I said, old school, no frills death metal sounding album. If you're a fan of the genre, this album is going to hit home because it has all the hallmarks of that genre and everything that comes with it. If you're expecting something more modern, more polished, more cleaned up, then this album is completely going to miss the mark. But I think if you're a fan of the band, you know exactly what you're going to get, and they delivered. They didn't go outside the box. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. I think if anything, they just brought the roots of the band, how they started with their sound, and then they brought back that into modern times with that still old school traditional DNA behind it. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Necronomical. Thicker drums and more driven guitars. But once again, the drums are thicker, but not necessarily in parallel with the guitars. You always feel like they're a little bit behind, maybe half a step behind as far as this song is concerned, pushing the guitars forward, allowing the vocals to have consistency. The track has a lot of different sides to it. It doesn't stay linear. It's not the way it starts, the way it finishes. It moves quite a bit. It's methodic at times, it's heavy at others, then it's more driven, then it's more powerful, then it changes again, slows things down. You're just never really sure exactly where you're going with this track. It's a little bit of everything. It's a buffet of death metal approaches within one single track, but still keeping everything very controlled, very cohesive, and those changes always give jolts to you as you're listening to the song. It's almost like it waking you up at different points, at different turns throughout the progression within the track. Next, you have Tomb of the Nameless. Great guitar riff that weaves itself throughout the entire track, penetrating, cutting, changing the experience, moving you around. This riff, the moment the song starts, you know you're going to get glued to it, and then it's going to be about the evolution of that riff and how that riff makes its way throughout the entire track without necessarily sounding repetitive, but rather be the point that you can hold on to, being that lighthouse in that foggy night that allows you to know exactly how you're going to navigate and how you're going to get to that finish line. There is a sense of pattern, but those patterns are not quite visible, so you need that guitar to kind of permeate through them and allow the transitions to be a lot smoother. It's an absolute ferocious sounding song because of it. The heaviness of the guitars, the movement of the guitars, that opening riff, everything about it makes this song feel very strong, very powerful, and then you have the consistency of the vocals that just adds volume to what's already happening behind it. Last but not least, As Angels Burn. This is a pure meat grinder. 3 minutes of demolishing drums and guitars, in this case parallel with one another. The guitar sound on this song feels very tight, very cohesive. The drums compensate the guitars compensate the drums. The two are adding together to become one more solid sound, one more solid approach, allowing the song to feel bigger, powerful. Like I said, an absolute meat grinder of a track, and it stays that way from start to finish. Now, the solo sections within this song kind of break the mold of that meating grinding process. They become more driven, they become a little bit over the top, really old school touch, using the whammy bar in order to create that sense of cutting through, that sense of stretching out the sound. I really enjoy that, specifically on a song that is this thick. When you have this much thickness in the sound and the experience, you want the solos to break completely away from that and cut through that thickness. That's exactly how this track is put together. I love it. I also love the bass line that really pops specifically on this track. There's a few tracks on this album you could really hear the bass coming through. It adds thickness perhaps where the drums are lacking a little bit of thickness. This song, it just makes its way throughout. You hear it at the beginning a little bit, you hear it in the middle, you hear it at the end, but whenever it comes through, it just gives an extra oomph. It just gives an extra step. It gives it a few extra pounds, if you will, to how this song moves, to how it sounds, and to how heavy it is. Krisiun, Mortem Solis, once again on July 29th on Century Media Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.